We talk a lot about GPUs in the race for AI, but what about the backbone supporting them? Every AI model needs a reliable home for data ingestion, APIs, and application hosting. That's where Vultr VX1 Cloud Compute comes in. Vultr VX1 offers an 82% performance per dollar advantage over traditional hyperscalers. By moving your core workloads to Vultr, you reclaim up to a third of your budget. Call it an AI dividend to reinvest back into your models. Deploy globally in seconds at vultr.com.
A few years ago, sustainability was all hyperscalers wanted to talk about. Renewable energy this, carbon offsets that, and then AI hit and the sustainability conversation took a back seat. But this begs the question, what does sustainable even mean when AI demand is accelerating? The answer? These days, it's less about 2040 targets and more about what communities and build timelines will accommodate right now.
Yes, sustainability is part of the data center conversation. What I would say though is it's probably not, number one on the priority list because I think things like time to power and activating economic development within the data center and AI market is probably number one.
The constraint has been evolving over time, right? In the past, the constraint was, hey, are there enough land or chips? I think that has shifted over to, are there enough electrons and liters of water?
In the past, there were a lot of questions about greenhouse gas emissions, but nowadays it's more about impact to the local community, like noise, water, air pollution. Those are the things that we are dealing with.
I think sometimes operators frame up the sustainability question as a contrast to them getting to market faster or to being the most efficient data center. And we really try to reframe that conversation with them to focus on what are the underlying technologies, what is the visibility, what are the control systems you need to be both sustainable and to run a very successful data center.
Welcome to the 5-9 miniseries Data Center 2.0, the show where we break down what's changing in the infrastructure that powers modern business. I'm Diana Guvertz, and today we are unpacking what sustainability means in the AI era, where power and water factor in, and how data center sustainability is increasingly about more than just how electricity is generated. It won't come as a surprise to anyone paying attention, but power is the number one constraint for data centers today. It is top priority, and the faster data center operators can secure power, the better. That means that while sustainability is still on the slide deck, it is increasingly competing with time to power.
Definitely power is the constraint. And, when customers come to us, they definitely look for, they've done all the research on the land and the water availability and where the gas is available. And then they're really talking about deploying power in the next 6 to 18 months. They don't have time for waiting for power to come 3 to 4 years from now. So they really want solutions right away.
So, what kinds of power options are on the table? Well, as Fierce has covered before, there is a rush to natural gas as a short-term solution, but data center operators are also exploring nuclear as a cleaner, longer-term option.
So the conventional answer by far is nuclear power. By far. It's the cleanest power. It's a great baseload player. It doesn't have intermittency issues. And the new reactors do not even have meltdown concern. So unfortunately, there is a political problem with nuclear power. And I think if that bottleneck can be solved, I think nuclear power is the way to go.
The current playbook isn't working, and it's not going to work in the long term if you continue this way. Something structural has to change, and that is bring your own dedicated power generation that is also clean, right? Nuclear is the firm, clean baseload piece of that overall puzzle. And so if you think about it, right, you can't train a frontier AI model on intermittent power 24/7 But you can also like decarbonize on gas. But if you look at nuclear, this is a very important question that everybody asks. Oh, well, how far are we out from getting a real nuclear solution? And that question arises because if you look at traditional nuclear, it has not been very fast, right? We essentially need a completely different model. If you have a nuclear reactor that is the highest power you can put on the back of a truck, then try to build hundreds and thousands of these so you can come down the cost curve and increase your speed. So we are building our first nuclear reactor. We've actually finished building our first nuclear reactor at Idaho National Lab, which will power on very soon. So hopefully by the time this episode is released, that reactor is achieved criticality. We're building then a power reactor by the end of this year, which will make electrons at full scale and power a co-located and co-built small data center. If we can prove that out, then starting next year and 2028 and onwards, we're going to ramp up our manufacturing capability. So we're not talking about 2030 beyond. We're talking about all speeding through all of our development cycles to get solutions to the customer late 27, early 28, and then ramp up by 29. And we have a very aggressive target internally, which is by 2030, we want to be the first nuclear company to deploy at least a gigawatt every single year from there onwards.
And then there are renewables like hydroelectricity, wind, solar. Though some of these are harder to fit on a data center campus, and others are tricky to use due to intermittent power generation issues. But the need for power is so great that there could be opportunities for renewables on the horizon.
So hydropower is ideal because it gets rid of one of the key bottleneck of solar, right? It doesn't have intermittency, but it's a niche solution because number one, you can't build hydropower wherever you want, right? It has to has the right geological formation. Number two, the permitting process is significantly more difficult because you have to flood a large area of land. I used to work at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on hydropower permitting, and it is a bureaucratic nightmare. So I am a big fan of hydroelectricity, but given the political reality of this country, I think hydroelectricity is still not, it's a niche play. Energy storage was my specialty. And I've been watching the industry actually grow from 2006 all the way to now. And I am very happy with where it's going. It's going a little slower than expected. But there are now such myriad of options. We're seeing batteries taking a larger part in the heavy lifting. We're looking at forced air. China just created the first forced air energy storage, and it seems to be running pretty well. We're looking at sand as a form of heat storage. So overall, I think if we just make the incentive right, we can even accelerate the growth of energy storage.
So, interconnection queues for data centers that are going to be built in the next few years are long and very uncertain. And I think this is an opportunity to consider or for data centers to move towards sustainable, renewable on site generation in a way that the circumstances really haven't been there in the past, where that choice is potentially the fastest time to market, the fastest time to power up on the data center, than waiting on an interconnection queue that has a high degree of uncertainty. Having the visibility and the controls gives you a lot more space to be flexible in what you choose to power that data center with. So our technology operates really, really fast. It can also inform those slower technologies, the demand management technologies that are kind of shaping the whole data center. That also means, though, that you can choose to have intermittent variable renewables as your power source if your data center has some flexibility to meet that variability.
And then there are fuel cell options like what Bloom Energy is deploying with Oracle.
We convert natural gas or any other fuel directly into electricity without combustion. Because we do that without any combustion, we don't produce any of the harmful pollutants that other technologies produce.
So, suffice to say, the sustainability decision tree for data centers has many, many branches.
When it comes to power solutions, there are three major options that we have, regardless of what you pick in terms of deployment. One is, hey, delay your project until you get clean, firm power. Number two is, well, build dirty now and then clean up later. Or three, uh, you have all the clean firm power, you need to just bring it along. So if you see, like today, hyperscalers are not choosing number one, right? They're not waiting for power to come. Most are doing some version of number two, right? With gas turbines as a bridge. Gas turbines fill the near term rational choice because of speed, but it does not make sense unless there's a committed plan to replace them.
Power may get the most headlines, but guests noted that water also shows up fast on the list of issues for data centers operating at scale.
More and more, what we're seeing is water is becoming a kind of a siting veto, right? Nevada has already banned evaporative cooling for new builds, and there's a lot of other states like Colorado River, Texas, and other areas that are feeling the real pressure of water shortages. So, water used to be an afterthought in site selection. I think today it's often, the first conversation along with power before we even talk about, do we have enough fiber in the land.
A lot of people use water for cooling. So that is one aspect of the water usage in a data center. The other usage is in the power. When you get the power from the grid intrinsically uses a lot of water. A lot of the legacy grid is filled with combined cycle gas turbine plants or coal plants, nuclear plants. They all use a lot of water. And so when data centers are looking at sustainability, the overall water usage, there is a metric called water usage effectiveness. It only typically looks at the water usage inside the data center. It doesn't consider the water usage coming from the grid.
That last point really matters because there are a few key metrics in sustainability. There's water usage effectiveness, or WUE, which Bala mentioned. There's PUE, which is power usage effectiveness. And there is carbon accounting, which can get a bit creative. And all of this means that a data center can look efficient on paper and less so in reality.
The challenge there is PUE does not measure where your power is coming from, whether it's clean or not, right? A coal-powered data center can have a great PUE, but your emissions are really high, so that doesn't really work towards our sustainability metric. The other one that is important these days when people are like looking for, okay, how do I cool my data center, is water usage effectiveness, and that is becoming more and more important question, especially in drier regions. But a lot of people, that's easier to game that those numbers. The industry average is about what, 0.6 liters per kilowatt hour. But it doesn't really distinguish where the water is coming from. Is potable water, reclaimed water, or am I putting strain on the region that I'm in? And the biggest flaw in WUE, in my mind, is that it only measures direct water usage in the data center. It does not account for how much water did I use in the power generation facility that's powering the data center. To me, that may be 5 to 10 times more than what the data center uses. And then lastly, carbon intensity. To me, that's the most important one in principle, but that's the one that's gamed the most in practice that I've seen. Companies routinely use market-based scope 2 accounting. They get renewable energy credits from a grid they don't even reside in. So the true metric in my mind ultimately boils down to, what is the carbon intensity per useful work?
But data center sustainability isn't just about where a facility's energy is coming from. It's increasingly also about efficiency and innovation.
There is so much, for lack of a better word, leakage, right? Leakage of power, leakage of compute, and things like that. In a lot of these data centers today, right? And these may be more on the training side, but the utilization of the chips are probably 12 to 14%, right? Now, you can't really get to 100% because you have to manage some headroom and efficiencies and all that stuff, right? You don't want the entire thing to come crashing down. But the fact that it's only 12%, what it is it's actual leakage over phases of like actually generating the compute. And if you can actually, juice that a bit, right, and get that from 12 to let's say 20 without impacting uptime and all the different business requirements, the ability to, flip that on the other side of it and saying, hey, that means less water, right? That means less power. That means potentially more sustainable energy, right? Renewable energy, things like that. And you can actually create a model that is actually more sustainable, more efficient. And for the data center operators, it's actually higher revenue, right?
So, on average, a power system that is not managed in real time is utilized between 30 and 50%. And the reason it is so low is that the power consumption spikes, which on the grid might come from air conditioning use or EV charging. In the data center, that comes from coincident workloads all spinning up at the same time. But those spikes drive the capacity ceiling for the data center. If those spikes can be managed, they could either be tamped down a little bit, they could be spread out in time a little bit, they could be spread out geographically between data centers. Now you can raise that average floor from 30 to 50% up to 70, 80, 90%. And now you're utilizing that already built capacity 2 or 3 times more than what you can do without that real-time observation and control system. That's what we have been demonstrating.
This is the under-discussed side of sustainability. Workload placement, scheduling, and better utilization can turn the same megawatts into more output, reducing the pressure to build the next gigawatt campus immediately.
As companies and data center operators and the actual users of these data centers become a little bit more sophisticated, there is probably ways to actually shift jobs, which is also power, both spatially and temporally, right? So if you think about demand response or any sort of grid flexibility mechanism, it's the same thing with workloads. It's not mature enough where you can just say I'm going to take any job and move it to tomorrow to a different data center. It's not there yet, but I think that's the direction that we're headed. And what that also allows then us to do is basically say, hey, it's going to be really congested. It's going to be very dirty. If you run this job right now, maybe we push it out to the night and we send it over to somewhere where it's powered by hydro or something like that. If there was a way to provide more access to all the data, whether it's workloads or power or cooling, the amount of innovation that you'll see in the space will just skyrocket, right? Because now what you can do is really figure out ways to become more sustainable, right? Become more efficient, better ROI on power, all that stuff.
So before we should build another data center plant or location, we should make sure that the current data centers are actually utilizing what they have available to them. And then second, we want all of those electrons to go into the work that data center is supposed to do. We don't want it to get lost as heat or wasted or stranded. And in order to do that well, you have to know where your power is flowing and what are your options in real time for controlling that or moving that into an optimal state.
When thinking about where we go from here, it's easy to think sustainability may be lost to an ever rising tide of compute demand. But it seems the conversation around sustainability is actually poised to shift yet again in the near future.
A lot of what we're talking about for these big build outs are for training jobs, right? As you evolve into inference, which is really where it's headed. And I mean, a lot of the market forecasts are basically saying we're going to go 80-20 by 2030, right? 80% inference. And so what that really means is that the requirement and the necessity of those 1 megawatt racks no longer exist, right? The way to look at it is that it's a lighter, less dense, infrastructure for data centers. What's going to happen is that you're going to be able to repurpose or build modular data centers, which is much smaller footprint, faster to build, or easier to activate. And then in those instances, the ability to actually bring in storage and power, whether it's renewable or not, is much more reasonable.
I see a big disconnect between those who sit on the direct current side of the data center, the actual server side, and those who sit on the AC power flow side, the actual power delivery infrastructure. And it takes both of those pieces working together to create a sustainable and efficient system. So if I were to say where the biggest problem is with the sustainability conversation, it is that we're moving really, really quickly, but we are still moving in silos. And we really need to look at that system as a whole in order to be able to get the most out of it.
The takeaway? Watch for 3 things over the next year. First, how fast behind the meter and on-site projects scale. Second, whether operators adopt more honest metrics like carbon per useful work. And third, whether utilization and orchestration improvements reduce the rush to build the next giant campus. That's all the time we have for now. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you listen or watch so you get the latest releases from our channel. And stay up to date with news in this space at fierce-network.com. We will see you next time.